Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's crew news conference with the STS-132 crew. We'll start with introductions and then take questions. We'll start with the introduction of Commander Ken Ham. Ken was born in Plainfield, New Jersey. He holds a bachelor's degree from the U.S. Naval Academy and a master's of science from the Naval Postgraduate School. He's a captain in the U.S. Navy and has logged more than 5,000 flight hours in more than 40 different aircraft. Ken was selected by NASA in June of 1998. He flew as a pilot on STS-124 in 2008. On that mission, he accumulated more than 13 days in space. We'll now let Ken introduce his crew.
Thanks, Nicole. This is actually, thank you guys for everyone showing up here and for everyone out there listening, because what that means is that you have an interest in space flight. And that's a wonderful thing, because there's an awful lot of work that goes into this. I'm not going to talk about the payload today or much about our operations, because I know that was briefed much earlier today from people that are a lot smarter than me, or maybe even my 5 best friends over here. I will give you a few thoughts of my own on what I've learned in the last year. That'll be pretty brief, and then I'll introduce these wonderful individuals down the line. I'm a first-time commander, and what I've learned as a commander in the last year has pretty much blown me away. And in that process, I've witnessed all of the folks that are involved in this process of getting a space shuttle and a launch package, the payload, up to orbit and assembled up there in space. Just a couple days ago, I had the privilege of sitting down with the commander of the very last mission, STS-131, who's a good friend of mine. I've known him for a long time. And one thing that stood out that's Al Poindexter, in Dex's mind, was when he flew up to space station and looked out the window, he had to basically stop and pause and look at the enormity of space station up there, circling the globe in the heavens. And it actually kind of made him stop and think for a little bit. And I remember having the same thought on my first flight. It'll probably be even more astounding this time, because the space station's a lot bigger. But it really makes you think about all of the engineering, all of the processing, the building of space station, the launching of missions, the trainers, the flight controllers. I can guarantee you right now there's a whole bunch of people somewhere in town right now that are asleep because they were up last night being flight controllers, doing what they do day in and day out. And it's really impressive. So for us, and I'm going to put some words in my crew's mouth here, it is an absolute privilege to represent that process. There are thousands of folks that are involved in every mission. And when you think about how space station started to where we are today, almost done building it, there are hundreds of thousands. And we get to represent them. That is our privilege. And hopefully we do a good job getting there. We take that right, that privilege, if you will, very seriously, even though we do like to have a lot of fun along the way. Hopefully we won't have too much fun. Let's see, going down the line here a little bit, let me introduce these guys, because we made a deal beforehand that I got to do the introductions, say a few words, and then I don't have to answer any more questions. They're going to answer all the questions. So introductions, and we all kind of have nicknames. If you pay attention through the flight, you'll see. People call me Hawk. Comes from ham hock, H-O-C-K. This is Dominic Antonelli. We call him Tony. I had to actually look up what your real first name was. Tony and I sort of come from the same hometown, figuratively. And what I mean by that is we've both spent a lot of time in F-18 cockpits on aircraft carriers. Never knew each other in the fleet, but all aircraft carriers operate the same way, and we all get afraid of the same things and learn about the same stuff. So when Tony and I got assigned together, it was almost like we were brothers, and that helps a lot. We can communicate frequently without speaking, which helps. Sometimes we have to translate that for some of the other folks. Tony is a certified smart guy, like everybody else on the crew. He came from, he went to school in MIT, and he last flew as the pilot on STS-119, delivering, that was the last solar array? Yes. Which He flew since I last flew, so maybe you've seen the station bigger than anyone else here, but it's even bigger now, which is kind of neat. Tony also just got selected as a captain in the Navy, which is a big step, which is pretty nice. It comes with a pay raise that'll come along here hopefully in a year or so. And then he can entertain us with a party, as is good tradition. Moving down the line is Garrett Reisman, PhD, Cal Tech, correct? Mm-hmm. Another certified smart guy. We call him Big G because he's big. Garrett is the lead EVA for EVA number 1, which is a tricky EVA assembling the new KU antenna for space station and the boom it goes on, as well as another addition to the Dexter arm up there on station. It's really tricky. It's a packed EVA. He's going out the door with Steve Bowen over there, who we'll get to shortly. And it's a lot of responsibility that he has. In addition to that, he is also going to be driving the big arm for the task of berthing MRM-1, which you can talk about later, is a totally unique first time we've ever tried to do a module berthing with this approach. Moving down, Mike Good. Good. We call him Bueno. He is just recently retired from the Air Force as a colonel, and he's a weapons systems officer. Mike, I almost promised I wasn't going to say this, but he just came back from the last Hubble servicing mission. Mike likes to remind us that he's a Hubble crew member at every turn, which is pretty entertaining. And Mike is going to lead EVA number 3, which is a tricky EVA, again, in that it is going to finish up all the hard primary tasks and then accomplish as many of the get-aheads as we can. And what makes that tricky is it's really hard to plan out exactly what you're going to do and practice it in the pools over the last year. So he's going to have to figure out what he needs to do essentially the night before they go outside on an EVA, which is no small feat. Moving down, Steve Bowen, another captain in the Navy. We call him Steve-O. He's particularly talkative. Steve happens to be the one submarine officer that we've ever had as an astronaut. And along with that comes some pretty interesting experience and a unique perspective on what it's like to live in a steel tube, if you will. And space station's not that far removed from that. Steve is going to lead EVA number 2, which is the bulk of the battery removal and replacement task on P6. And to be quite honest, a lot of the success of all of our EVAs in general are going to lie on his shoulders and getting that task as accomplished as possible to make room on EVA 3 so we can finish EVA 3 tasks as well as go back and clean up anything that didn't get done on EVA 1. So we're asking a lot of Steve. Lastly down there is Piers Sellers. We call him Epi. I don't know if he'll divulge why. Probably not. But it's a good nickname and a good story. Piers has by far the most experience in space out of anyone on the crew. He's flown twice before, done 6 EVAs. One of the only pieces of direction I got from my boss when this crew was assigned was don't let Piers go outside. So Piers, if you have any for good reasons. So Piers bit off on attempting a whole new approach to spaceflight. He's now our main arm operator for the big arm on space station, which meant after we were assigned, he had to go off to school in Canada, learn how to run this big arm, and then learn how to operate it in conjunction with all the EVAs. And every one of our EVAs is very big arm intensive. So Piers is going to be operating that arm from inside the cupola, which will be the first time we're doing assembly flight operations from the cupola. And that should be some pretty spectacular views. In addition, Epi is our science officer, if you will, in charge of just about everything to do with the payload science that we're doing on board and some of the stuff that's happening on space station itself. And then in addition to that, he is also the MRM-1 payload commander. He will be doing all the commanding to the vehicle, to the module, from both Space Shuttle and from Space Station through the Russian laptop system, talking to the module through the arm, which is, it sounds kind of easy, but it's not. It's a very complex system. Fortunately, Piers is pretty fluent in Russian, which helps him understand our Russian payload. I think I ran out of people, didn't I? So that's it for introductions. I guess we can open it up.
Nice job. All right, we're going to start with questions here from the Johnson Space Center. We'll start on this side. If you can indicate if you have a question and state your name and affiliation. Go ahead, Bill.
Bill Harwood, CBS, and I'll ask Big G a question if I can. We were talking earlier during the earlier briefings about how progress is usually come and dock and then hit the station with some pretty good motion compared to the way you guys normally do things. I'm just curious if you could describe a little bit the docking with SSRMS and the kind of rates or kind of motions you're going to put on that thing to get the mechanism to engage.
It's a very good question. As you mentioned, this module was originally designed to fly up like all the other Russian modules and dock under its own power autonomously. So the way they do that is they just have a big cone and a big probe, and they get a good running start. And it's almost like bringing train cars together. When I was inside the station a couple times when docking occurs, and you could feel her come in. So it's definitely an event. So what we're trying to do here is very different. And even though we call it the mini, MRM-1 stands for the Mini Research Module. And that's why, by the way, that's also why I got the job of docking her, because they needed a mini astronaut to dock the Mini Research Module. But they call it mini, but like many things, it's actually very big, and it's to have on the very end of the arm, with the arm fully extended, there's a lot of dynamics at play, and so the arm can't get the kind of ramming speed that it normally develops under its nominal means of docking with the system. So we're going to be restricted to coming in approximately 5 times slower. And that's the fastest that the arm can do safely. Right, or Progress Soyuz, or the way this thing would normally dock. So, but what we hope to do is with the arm, we hope to have very fine control and have it come right down the middle. And so there's a lot of people worked really hard, did a lot of analysis to verify that this is going to work. But the exciting thing is that it's never been done before, and so I'm sure we'll all be watching very carefully as we bring that in on flight day 5.
And I'll ask, well, actually I'll move ahead. I'll talk about this later. I'll stick with you real quick though on first EVA, I guess, moving the S-Gant. Clearances looked pretty tight in the video they were showing us during the EVA briefing. And how tight is that, and how worried are you? Not worried is the wrong word. How much concern is there about banging the thing on something or whatever?
I'll be holding it, so I'm really concerned. That's the dish is pretty fragile, and we're instructed not to bump that into anything. So Piers is going to be operating the big arm, and I'll be standing on the end of it while we bring the dish out of the structure. And at that point, the dish comes very close to the boom of the arm, as you probably saw in the video. And the worrisome thing for me is that I can't really see it because I have a big face full of dish, and the boom is on the other side. So I'm going to be counting on Piers here to talk me through it and give me nice calls like, I see you got over a foot, you're looking good, and that'll make my heart rate come down. And as he will have to coordinate very carefully at that moment is when we come the closest. So it's definitely an area of concern and something we've practiced a lot, both in the pool, but probably more importantly in a virtual reality lab that we use. And that practice, I think, is going to pay dividends because I think we have a pretty good coordination between us, and we'll hopefully get her done, but stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Mark Kirkman, Interspace News. Since we're kind of celebrating Atlantis with this flight, I got a question for, I guess, Hawk and Tony probably, but if any of y'all have input, please chime in. This morning I asked Jerry Ross, in the airplane business, every aircraft, every tail number has its own quirks. And I was wondering, within the astronaut office, and particularly when you're getting ready for this flight, are there any nuances or anything particular or unique to Atlantis that they brief you about or tell you about or say, hey, Atlantis does this differently than some of the other orbiters? And then the other part of my question is, at wheel stop, have you given any thought to how that's going to feel, knowing that that's the last time Atlantis is going to roll?
All yours.
All mine. I think we'll talk about wheel stop after Hawk gets us that far. I'd hate to get too far ahead of myself. The quirks on Atlantis are all little small things and more interesting tidbits, except for one that I talked about at TCDT. There's basically an extension cord, if you will, a power cord capability that the other two space shuttles have that Atlantis doesn't. It allows you to take space station power and power the orbiter while you're docked. And Atlantis doesn't have that capability, so that'll limit the duration of our stay. So if we run into any difficulties, like Big G not getting MRM-1 docked right away, or Steve and Bueno being slow on the batteries and stuff, it'll limit our ability to stay and to continue working different issues. But that's known. That's been Atlantis's config the whole time. The other little one is one of the lights is burned out on a system that we use, but we cover up the lights with our fingers, so it's kind of hard to tell if they're on or not since your fingers are over the top of them. And that's putting out the drag chute. We get, I guess, 4 lights when we deploy the drag chute. It's pretty obvious when it comes out because it tugs on you as it slows you down. One of those 4 we expect to not come on. I guess actually there's 8, so 2 of the 8 won't come on. And then lights are kind of important to me. On Discovery, we lost the light in the restroom, and that's a pretty important light. And so we've had, during the flow, Atlantis has had a couple of light bulbs burned out. Normally no big deal, you just go in there and change them out, but we only got one in the restroom, so I want to make sure that one's working for these guys to keep that place clean when they're done.
Hi, Robert Perlman with CollectSpace.com. As Commander Ham mentioned, you've all flown to space before. You all have experience in space. This will be your last space shuttle mission. And taking an example from Piers about learning a new task or coming up with a new challenge, I wonder if each of you that care to answer how you are approaching this flight, either from a professional new challenge or for a personal desire of what memories you want to capture on this being your last shuttle flight. Thanks.
Bueno.
Thank you, Commander.
You didn't look.
No, I tried not to make eye contact.
That's all right.
No, it's an interesting question. For me, it's going to be, there's a lot to look forward to. As Ken described, this crew has a lot of experience. We've all flown before. It's a highly qualified crew. And since Ken brought it up, something about me going to, I wasn't going to say anything, but the ice has been broken now, so I can talk about Hubble. My only other flight was to Hubble, so there's a lot to look forward to on this flight, going to a new destination, to the International Space Station, for me to see it for the first time. And I thought Hubble was big, so I can't imagine what the station's going to look like as we rendezvous with it. And then getting to go through that hatch and into that building, orbiting space station is going to be incredible. And then going out a different airlock on the spacewalks. You know, on the spacewalks on my last flight, we went out the shuttle and just hung out in the payload bay, which was like going out and working in your garage. And this time I'm going to go out the airlock from the station and get to, you know, wander around the neighborhood a little bit and go out to the very end of the P6 truss, work on batteries with both these guys, Steve and Garrett. And I'm really looking forward to the view out there, just hanging on, you know, at the end of the world out there and just getting to watch the Earth go by below. So a lot to look forward to.
Okay, no other comments? Other questions on this side? Go ahead.
Greg Dobbs, hi, from HDNet Television. 2 technical questions. The first one is for Big G, highly technical. How tall are you and what do you weigh? To earn that nickname.
Here on Earth or in space?
Here on Earth, at home.
I was told that there wouldn't be any personal questions today. That's why I'm glad that we're all sitting down, because I kind of look like a pygmy when we all stand up and do these press conferences. But I'm 5'4.5", and 172 pounds. So it's all muscle. But the thing is that you do grow in space. In fact, that's really the whole reason I signed up for this job. On my last mission, I grew over an inch, so I got up pretty close to 5'6", and I have the video of me standing next to a tape measure to prove it. So that's I'm looking. You were asking before about what we're looking forward to about going back to space. Well, that's pretty much it.
Don't tape measures grow in space too?
No.
Oh, okay. The other very technical question for any couple of you, if you don't mind.
None of us are couples.
We'll see after 2 weeks. But can you talk about what it was like? It's not something you get to do on every mission, to ride the crawler out to the pad.
Steve-O.
I've done it before, so it was. I didn't get underway on it this time, but last time I actually waited before it started rolling, and I spent a lot of time on Navy ships and submarines, and it was literally like a ship moving. It just seemed like the building was moving away from you. The vehicle didn't feel like it was moving at all, so smooth. This time it was fantastic and a little bit different, because we get out there late at night, and there was a crowd of people out there, and the halogen lights, and it just seemed. It was a lot of fun. There were a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of people out there wishing us well, watching the vehicle go by. We got a pretty good image of the vehicle shadow up against the VAB. Sort of looks like the bat signal from the old TV series. So that was all very exciting. Then we got a chance to run around and look at the vehicle as it was rolling down away from the VAB, and some of the lights in the distance with the blue glow in the mist. It was pretty interesting, pretty exciting.
Stephen Clark with Spaceflight Now for Hawk or whoever else would like to field this. Since this is Atlantis' last scheduled flight, is there anything you planned during the mission or you're carrying with you to commemorate that milestone in space history?
Piers.
I think it's one for you, Hawk.
You're our deal. You forgot our deal.
You're the driver. Yeah.
First off, we're officially calling this, the six of us are calling this the first last flight of Atlantis. And I think that's appropriate, because we really don't know what she's going to do next. She's definitely going to get serviced and be ready to launch as a launch on need orbiter. And because of the likelihood that she could fly again, I don't think we're going to do a whole lot to try to make sure that it is the last flight. I think that would kind of be the wrong juju, if you will.
Add something to that. I mean, it's tough because we're right in the middle of it, the nose down to doing the operation, but we're kind of aware there's a sense of history here. I mean, these 3 surviving shuttles, they're pieces of history. We've been to the Constitution and HMS Victory for myself, these old ships that marked the state of technology. Well, these 3 ships will go down in history too. So it's, it's a real honor to ride one of them.
Go ahead. Jill Tolk with the Cohasset Mariner in Massachusetts and also Bay Area Houston Magazine. Question for the spacewalkers: what do you expect will be your biggest challenge outside the hatch, and to what portions of the EVAs are you most looking forward?
Steve, start. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's true. She did, didn't she? Yeah, in EVA 1, the hardest part is actually just going to be running the EVA as written, because we've never been able to practice it as written in the NBL or even in the VR lab. The way we've had to practice and train, all that stuff is simulated out of sequence, and it's very difficult. Garrett's got to putting this thing together. He's got a tough job standing on the arm, basically about half, if not a little more than half, of the entire EVA. It's going to require a lot of concentration. So On EVA 1, we've never been able to run it as written. EVAs 2 and 3, well, EVA 3 from Mike, we have no idea what he's really going to end up doing out there. So it really depends on what we do on EVA 2. And on EVA 2 and the batteries in general, we've not been able to practice them either as written. We end up reversing it because of the constraints in the arm and the NBL. You actually stand on the arm in the NBL to go to the battery pallet, whereas in reality, we'll be standing on the truss of the space station and the piers will be bringing the pallet to us. So it's reversed. And so the difficulties we've had to overcome, yes, it is different. It's a little
now
surprising.
You tell me.
Yeah. My gosh. But
left and right is right. Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So, but that that getting past that mental image and understanding that difference exists is probably going to be the hardest thing as far as the EVAs. And then there's always the general concerns with EVAs, just getting out the hatch and getting out there to do work.
Thanks a lot. Now I have a lighthearted question. You all are pretty tight as a crew, good sense of humor. What sort of in-flight entertainment might we expect? If you had an IMAX camera, what would we see?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
I'm not sure we should answer this question.
Thought all the cameras were broken.
It might be best to wait for that movie to come out after the flight. We've, each crew gets to lay down their own priorities and what we think is important in a flight. And we sat down almost a year ago together and discussed basically what we thought we needed to get done. Number 1 was accomplish the mission. And then 2 and 3 is don't hurt anybody, don't hurt any big pieces of space hardware, like a space shuttle or a space station. And then number 4, right behind all that, was have fun doing it and let people around you know that we're having fun. And I think a whole bunch of our trainers are here today, and they might agree that we've had a little fun over the last year. But we're still getting the mission done. So, yeah, we are a tight group.
Hi, Eric Berger with the Houston Chronicle. Maybe just one of the two guys that are going to be changing out the batteries. Talk a little bit about the challenges of that. I mean, when people outside of the space program think of changing a battery, they may think of their car. Talk a little bit about the task that you'll be performing on orbit and how maybe that's different.
Yeah, these aren't double A's. You know, I have 4 brothers, and one of my brothers likes to give me a hard time about flying up in space and changing batteries. He thinks this is not a very difficult task, not a big deal. But these are like 400-pound nickel hydrogen batteries. They're the size of a very big suitcase, probably bigger than the airlines would let you take on without charging you extra. But and they're pretty tricky. You know, this is a task similar to what they did on 127, just on the other side of the truss. They were out there on the end of P6, and they had to replace 6 of these batteries too. And it's a challenge. Getting the batteries just on and off the pallet. There's a soft dock. They're basically just connected with 2 bolts. So you'd think it'd be pretty simple, but just the alignment and the tolerances are very tight. And you have to get the soft dock the battery onto the pallet and before you can drive the bolts, and just getting it all aligned. And as you're pushing the battery onto the pallet that's on the robotic arm, and it's stretched out to the very limits of its capabilities, there's a lot of dynamics and a lot of motion that goes with that. So you have to be careful when you're pushing not to excite that motion and just end up pushing the pallet away from you, and you're still holding onto this battery trying to get it in. And then there's as we get the batteries off the pallet, we have to sort of shepherd them, pass them back and forth between the 2 of us, because the arm can't get us all the way out to the very end of the truss where we're actually going to put them in. So it's a tricky job, and we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, Jim Oberg with NBC. I could follow up the last question about having fun. The common experience I've heard from people back from missions is that we never lasted quite long enough, and there were several things you wanted to do, but you never got to.
at the G or PG level, can you describe some of the things that you didn't get to do last time that you determined not to miss this time? Okay, PG-13.
My top priority is pretty easy. The cupola was not installed when I was at the space station, and so I'm looking forward to getting out there and looking out the windows in the cupola.
Everyone's got everything done, right?
For me, I just taken pictures, especially outside on the EVAs. Last time I had 2 EVAs and didn't take a single picture. Just had my just very focused and my my nose in the telescope, and so I'm looking forward to again being out there at the end of P6, out there on the end of the truss from the station, and just taking it all in, looking at that huge vehicle, looking back at the shuttle that's several hundred feet away, and seeing these guys in the little windows back there, but taking some pictures while I'm out there of the other guys, of myself.
I think just simply, like anything you do in life, the second time you do it, you remember it more. I remember ascent from my last flight, and I remember it was an awful lot of fun. And I remember looking out the window, but I don't exactly remember a whole lot of it. So this time I'm going to remember more. And the same with entry, and the same with day-to-day living on orbit. This time around, it's going to be, I think, a little easier to not be overwhelmed. And that'll make a difference.
I'm looking forward to seeing stations pretty much complete. This is like 98% complete by the time we get there. And pretty much all of us, when we started out in the job, it wasn't there, or only just there. So this is terrific to finally see this huge edifice put together in one piece. It'll be really something.
Last questions.
All right, with that, we're going to switch now to Kennedy Space Center.
Yes, hello, Marcia Dunn, Associated Press. For the commander and who else might like to answer, whether it's the last flight of Atlantis or the real last flight, there aren't too many shuttle missions left, even with an extra one or two. And does that run through your mind at all, the winding down of this program? Is there any sense of subdueness or I don't know, the flight director told us earlier he's treating this with reverence, and I'm just wondering if this enters into your thoughts at all as you get ready to fly Atlantis for the last or next to last time.
I think you can't, in a lot of ways, you can't really afford to get too distracted by thinking about the words you just said. This is probably the kind of thing, especially if it does turn out to be the last flight of Atlantis, this is probably the kind of thing that's really going to hit all of us after we're done with the mission and we realize what part of history we may have played. Like Piers alluded to a little earlier, and I'll put some more words on it, I think the space shuttle as a machine is the single most incredible machine humanity has ever built. Space station might be right up there with it, but it is an incredible machine. The fact of the matter is, though, if we want to use our national assets to do space exploration beyond low Earth orbit, you can't do that in the space shuttle. So there's the logical side of all of us that realize that the program has to come to an end at some point. And it is an honor and a privilege for us to represent being part of that crew at the end. I think that's all my head has gotten around that question so far. It'll probably look a whole lot different 6 months from now.
Thank you. And a question for Garrett. When you came back from your long mission, you were happy to be of smaller stature because you were bouncing around right after the long flight here at the news conference, I remember, certainly unlike many other long-duration astronauts. And I'm wondering, will there be any advantages to being 5'4.5" during a spacewalk? And I'm wondering what the lower limit is for spacewalking. I remember once upon a time an astronaut was too small to spacewalk, and these are questions asked by someone considerably smaller than yourself.
I'm starting to feel a little typecast here on this crew. You sure want to ask something about the my job as MS1 on Ascent? Or, no. Well, actually, being of shorter stature and kind of stocky is anecdotally an advantage for landing, as you noted. We've guys and gals of this type of body build tend to, for whatever reason, do better as far as readapting to gravity right after landing. We don't really know why, and actually we have a lot of smart people trying to figure that out. So it's an advantage for that, and for limbo contests, I can't say it's an advantage for spacewalking, because often having a longer reach is useful. But what I've found is that you can accommodate that by just changing your body position, and I might approach the same task with a slightly different angle. So it hasn't really been much of a limitation. The factor in the reason that there's an issue about size of the crew member and spacewalking is simply a result of the suits that we have. We only have 3 sizes. We don't have a small. We have a medium, a large, and an extra large. And what really determines your ability to work in the suit is not necessarily your height or your reach, but it's more the distance between your shoulders. Because if the suit comes out to here, and you only come out to here, then you end up in the suit kind of not being able to get a full access to your work envelope. And that poses a big problem for people who are more slender. So for example, Bueno here, right next to me.
Mike, hi.
Mike. I was going to say Steve. I still got time to get to know you, man. We're not launching for another week. Bueno, or Mike, sitting next to me, actually runs in a smaller suit size than I do, and it's driven, again, not by our height, obviously, but by our width.
Should y'all stand up back to back?
You want us to go back to back? I think that's all I'll say on that subject.
Hi, this is James Dean from Florida today with a few questions. First, possibly for Piers. I was wondering if there's any significant differences working with a Russian payload compared to one from any of your other international partners, other than the different language, obviously.
Well, yeah, this one turns out to be quite complicated because we're not only dealing with a Russian payload, but we're talking through all the US and other boxes to actually reach it. So to send a command to the Russian module, we have to send it through a whole lot of boxes in the US segment, which then finds its way up through the arm, and then it's sort of stuck into the ear of the module and translated into Russian somehow, and then the Russian computer says, okay, I'll do it, about 8 seconds later. So we're looking forward to being patient while we're doing this, making sure that the stuff that we send out there goes through all the little telephone links, ends up in the Russian module. We get confirmation that it's doing what it's supposed to do, and then proceed. As Garrett was talking about earlier, we're going to be pretending to dock this like a Soyuz. He's going to use the arm and very carefully approach the docking cone, and we're going to extend the probe, and we're going to fool it into thinking it's docking itself. And that's how it's going to activate all its latches and hooks and stuff like that. Should be interesting.
Thanks. Second, you guys, understandably, I guess, don't want to dwell too much on the last, this being the last flight for Atlantis, but it is built into the design of your mission patch. And I was wondering if whomever oversaw that design could talk about how you got to that image, and if Atlantis does in fact fly again, will you have to consider a redesign?
Oh, God, I hope not. That was a lot of work. But I think we're all pretty pleased with how the patch came out, and we did know that if it's not Atlantis' last flight, it is as we've talked about quite a bit, the end of an era, and the end of we're approaching the end of the space shuttle program one way or the other. So having the shuttle and Atlantis in particular flying off into the sunset, I think certainly is appropriate. And we really felt that, given this point in history, that it was important to recognize that on the patch. And then we hedged our bets a little bit by pointing out that since the shuttle actually flies towards the east, we're actually flying into the sunrise. And that sun is rising over our new module, which is in Rassvet is its name in Russian, and what that means is dawn. So it's also the sun rising on the promise of heralding, I believe. Heralding the promise of new research that will be performed inside this module.
Thanks, and finally for Captain Ham, you've discussed a little bit about how having an all-veteran crew helped to streamline, I guess, your training flow. Wondered how rushed has this flow been for you, given that many of you have flown recently, and what are some of the things that you skipped that you probably would have had to do if you had one or more rookies on the crew?
Things that we skipped were half of the Christmas holidays break and spring break. Wish we could have those back. This has been a bit of a rushed flow, and that is for a various number of reasons that aren't really important at this time. But what our training team, every crew has a shuttle training team and a space station training team that tries to accomplish this very long list of tasks that are laid out in a crew training catalog. And they've done a great job of actually crediting many of the classes that were in that catalog with our recent spaceflight experience. And that helped out immensely. And they came up with a plan that got us from where when we were assigned to the launch day. In fact, our training scheduler, she's here in this room, actually managed to get us 2 days of vacation before we go into quarantine this Friday, which is absolutely spectacular. And we can all go home and mow the lawn and catch up on the things that we need to do before we go to space for a couple of weeks. So we were simply able to make it because these guys are so squared away and didn't embarrass us through a year of training so far. We got a couple more days to go.
Okay, with that, we're going to switch now to headquarters.
Thank you. This is Tarek Malik from Space.com. And my first question is for maybe Garrett or for Piers. I'm just thinking about when you install the MRM-1 module, you'll be installing a Russian module to an international space station carried by an American spaceship and wielded by a Canadian robotic arm. And I mean, it just seems interesting to see all of that tie together at the station. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on what is a nearly complete space station that will be complete in just 2 more flights.
Hello, Tariq. Well, in many levels, this whole project has been a smashing success, and I think one of them is the whole business of international partnerships. You would never have thought 20 years ago that we'd be able to pull it off. The European Union, Japan, Canada, and Russia all being strong players in this. So I think it's a tremendous accomplishment. It really is, that we now have a fully functioning space station, and the fact that so many different nations are involved has actually played to the strength of the project. When some of our equipment didn't work, the Russians helped out with their stuff and vice versa. So I think this is going to be a very solid first step to the future of space exploration, which I expect to be international as well.
Thank you. And for Commander Hem, you mentioned, I guess, some of the benefits of having an all-veteran crew, and I'm just wondering if there have been any drawbacks, maybe too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. And has it been a challenge to kind of maintain your focus, given the pace of your training and a lot of maybe the background noise of the shuttle programs ending and the future of NASA over these last month and a half or so?
It's actually a good question, but the answer is no. I don't think any of us have been really distracted by all of the uncertainty that is out there right now. If I may digress a little bit and answer a bit of a different question. When we were down at the Cape last week at TCDT 2 weeks ago, we talked to a lot of folks that are down there working on the vehicle, working at the launch pad, working in launch control. And almost every time you have a conversation with someone, some sentence in there ends with, "if I still have a job." And this is because the future is somewhat uncertain right now. And on a very personal level, that affects their paycheck and their ability to pay their mortgage and all that. And as you can imagine, that's probably pretty scary. However, every single person we met down there has a smile on their face and is motivated to do the best job they can do. That air, that attitude is present here at the Johnson Space Center. And I think it's a testament to the caliber of the folks that work in this program. I think folks that want to get involved in space exploration aren't in it for the money. They're in it for space exploration. And they're true professionals. They're working it all the way to the end. We're trying to do that on our part as well. And again, we get to represent that effort, and it's pretty much an honor.
Okay, with that, we will now switch over to the Glenn Research Center.
Hi, it's John Mangles from the Flame Dealer in Cleveland. Two questions for Colonel Good. First, Captain Ham talked about your responsibility with the get-alongs, the additional sort of bonus work that you have. That sounds a bit nerve-wracking. I wonder if you could talk in more detail about how you plan for that and sort of how you mentally approach it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, John. Thanks for joining us today. I guess Steve's been telling me all along that for EVA 3 that you're not going to know what you're going to do until the night before. And so on my last mission, I was much more used to having it very planned out, and we practiced and practiced and practiced what we're going to do. And for this mission, it's much more going to be thinking on your feet and on the fly. Each EVA is dependent on the one before it, and will affect what we get done on the first EVA, will affect how we do on the second one, and then on the third one. So I'm looking forward to, as I said earlier, just going out a different airlock, out onto the station, and just having those experiences. I'm confident that we're going to get it all done, and we're going to work hard with the team inside the vehicle. Tony's it's an open book test, this flying in space thing and the spacewalks. Tony has all the answers. He's going to tell us what to do as we go along, and we really are looking forward to getting everything done.
Thank you. Second, you come from a long tradition of Ohio-born and bred astronauts, particularly on the shuttle crews, not the least of which is John Glenn. I wonder if you could talk about being a part of that Ohio astronaut tradition.
Well, it's really an honor. I'm not sure why there's so many astronauts from Ohio. I'll quote my buddy Mike Foreman, who's in the class ahead of us, in the class of '98 with, I think he was in your class, Hawk. He said, and this is a joke, but he said that there's a lot of folks in Ohio that are looking for work out of state. So,
That's funny.
Yeah, he's a funny guy. He's also from Ohio. He grew up in Wadsworth, where my mom and dad did, and you know, his parents knew my parents, and so it's really pretty neat to hook up with them here. I didn't know him before we got together down here at Johnson Space Center, and we're training together. So, but there have been a lot of very interesting and successful astronauts from Ohio: John Glenn, Neil Armstrong, and it's a real privilege to be, just listed on the same page with those guys, and just to have the opportunity to go fly in space. I feel very lucky.
That's our last question from Glenn.
Okay, with that, we'll return back here to the Johnson Space Center, where we've got a couple follow-ups on the side. Again, if you'll state your name and affiliation.
Mark Carreau for Aviation Week. I have a question for the arm operators and using the cupola, and how that improves the work that you're trying to do on this mission, if it does. And I'm also interested in whether you could even do the MRM dock without having that vantage point, if it helps you with that.
It's a tremendous help, being able to look out the window. It's something that we have developed techniques over the years of the space station program to overcome not having a window. And usually it involves using 3, 4, 5, sometimes even more camera views. And you get a little piece of information from each camera view, but it makes your job much more difficult. Your primary concern when you're operating the robot arm is not hitting anything as you move something as big as the MRM-1 around. And to do that, often you're reliant on bits and pieces of information on all different camera views. Sometimes you can't just see it in one view. Having the cupola there, for example, when I bring the MRM-1 from the payload bay over to where it's installed on the space station, I can look out the window and not have to look at anything else, and I know that I'm fine and that all is well and I can proceed. Whereas if I could do the task from the lab without the window view, but I have to use a multitude of cameras and constantly pan and tilt them, and it just adds to your operator workload. There's nothing quite like being able to look out the window and see where you're going. So it's something I'm really looking forward to. I did robotics ops my last flight without the cupola, and I predicted it's going to be a tremendous advantage this time.
Hi, Stephen Clark with Spaceflight Now again for the spacewalkers about the P6 battery changeout. Has there been any sort of change to the procedure from what the 127 guys did? Any tips from them about don't do this, this is a better way to do this, et cetera?
Yeah, we learned a lot. We spoke to the 127 crew when they came back, and there were some technical changes they made to the battery pallet. But mostly what we learned from those guys and what they did outside. They just had a tremendous amount of information, and probably by the time they get to their 6th battery, they felt that they understood, and they've tried to pass that on to us. So we've taken what they did for training, we've tried to add to it based on their recommendations. We got a lot of techniques we've actually changed from the way we started before we spoke to them till after they came back and learned what they did. We changed our techniques as to how we're handling the batteries. So we're building on what they did, and hopefully we can do it a little more efficiently based on what they accomplished.
I'm Marianne Dyson with National Space Society. The Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America are holding the Nebula Awards in conjunction with your launch, and they'll be there watching. And I was just wondering if any of you were influenced by a science fiction book or movie when you were growing up and that influenced you to go into your career in the space program.
Me. I was following the whole business of, the assault on the moon in the late 60s. And at a very impressionable age, about 13 years old, I saw 2001. And I was completely captivated. I think the images that Stanley Kubrick put together in that movie of the shuttle coming up to space station and people working on the moon and all the rest of it, it made a huge impression on me. And it stayed with me. And the real thing has not disappointed.
Hi, I'm Mark Kirkman with Interspace News again. I'm a little hesitant to ask this question because I don't know how much you want to get into the voodoo that is crew assignments, but every crew seems to have a different dynamic, and our cursory look at you shows that you all have a pretty great dynamic. So I was wondering, when they come to you as the commander, do you have any input into who comes on board? Do you go, well, such and such is available, I'd really like to fly with this guy, he's got the right skill set, et cetera? How do you put the crew together?
The real answer is I don't put the crew together, but to get a little more to what you're getting at, nobody comes to the prospective commander and says, who do you want on your mission? It just doesn't work that way. In fact, you don't even really know you're on the mission for sure until it actually gets assigned. What I tried to do is take the initiative and go ask and just see what happened. And it actually worked out pretty well. That's really all I know of the process, but I'm very pleased with the result.
Is that who you're dealing with initially?
Right.
Bill Harwood, CBS for Piers again. Well, I saw 2001 when I was a kid, too, and I remember over the years thinking that the scenes we saw in 1968 when that movie came out were believable. You know, we all thought that that's what you'd have, or something like that in 2001. And you say the real thing hasn't disappointed, but just as someone who thinks about this sort of thing, are you not, when you look at what you have today versus what we thought might be real back in 68, it's not like that. And I'm curious if you had any thoughts along those lines of, if disappointment's not the right word, that you don't wish we were further along at the very least.
Well, of course, we all wish we were further along. And I think that in the 60s, the rate of change, the rate of achievement was so rapid. You know, our expectations were really raised. You know, we went from nothing to a lunar landing in 10 years. It was incredible. So it's all taking a bit longer than we thought when we were watching 2001. But I think we're going to get there. I think that during our lifetimes, we're going to see people on Mars, exploring Mars, and I really look forward to that. It's going to be as much fun watching it as doing it, frankly. So it's a great age to be alive in. I'm really enjoying it.
Okay, thank you all very much. That concludes our briefing. A reminder, you can find out the latest information on the mission at our website, www.nasa.gov. Thank you.